Welcome back to SFC's Food for Thought series. My name is Kira. I'm a Queen's Engineering graduate, and with me today is Lyndon and Justice and our guest, Evan Wilson. I'll just do a quick intro of SFC and then let Lyndon and Justice introduce themselves. So for those of you who are just seeing SFC for the first time, we are an advocacy group made by students and young professionals for students and young professionals who believe that Canada can have a strong future in resources, the economy, and the environment. Please connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Students for Canada if you want to learn more about what we do. Lyndon, do you want to give your intro first really quick?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lyndon. I just am finishing up my degree at the University of Lethbridge with a history degree. I've been working with Students for Canada for the last two years, 2.5, something around there. It's been a while, and yeah, very excited to have you here.
Evan, I'm Justice. I am from the University of Alberta. I took a Bachelor of Commerce degree, majored in finance and minored in economics, and I've been with SFC for about 1.5 years now. So yeah, I'm really excited for what you have to say and can't wait for the presentation.
So joining us today is Evan Wilson. As CanREA's Senior Director of Western Canada, Evan Wilson represents members in Alberta and Saskatchewan. He previously served as Regional Director for the Prairies for the Canadian Wind Energy Association, where he worked in the same provinces. Prior to joining the Canadian Wind Energy Association, he worked for 3 years with the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association and for 4 years with the Global Public Affairs, where he was a consultant on transportation and energy files. Evan has an MA in political science from the University of Calgary, and he is based in Calgary. Just before I hand over the floor to Evan, please know that attendees are encouraged to ask questions through the presentation using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will address all the questions at the end of the session. So now I will share the spotlight with our guest, Evan, and you're welcome to share your screen, Evan. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kira, Lyndon, and Justice for having me here. I'm really excited to talk today about renewable energy in Alberta. So I just want to say thank you for the invitation. There's a lot of great news here. I'm looking forward to back and forth and conversation through the Q&A. And hopefully there is a lot here to spur conversations and questions. So does this move forward? Yes, it did. Perfect. So who are we as the Canadian Renewable Energy Association? So I'll try to keep this brief, but I think it's really worth sharing, just talking about what we're talking about when we talk about renewable energy today. So Canadian Renewable Energy Association is an association that is a result of a merger between the Canadian Solar Industries Association and the Canadian Wind Energy Association. So we have members that are interested in developing solar energy, wind energy, and we've added energy storage to our mandate here as well, because energy storage is something that will facilitate the increased deployment of renewable energy across Canada. Our members are companies that are interested in developing and operating wind, solar, and storage. They're also companies that build the technology that are involved in generating electricity from wind, generating electricity from the sun, and storing it as well. We also have members that are on the environmental or technical side, providing support for permitting, providing support for project development and the like. So we really do have membership that encompasses the broad range of services from all along the supply chain, all along the development chain, to ensure that that projects can get built and operated. So that is who we are, and that is who we represent. And we're really in Alberta, I think, going through a golden age of renewable energy development. And part of the reason we are is if you take a look at this slide that I've just put up on the screen here, where it's got what we call the levelized cost of energy coming from wind and coming from solar energy. And what the levelized cost is, what is the cost to generate a megawatt hour of electricity with each of these technologies. And so this is comes from figures done by an organization called Lazard that every year does what's called the Lazard Levelized cost of energy analysis. So they look at all the different kinds of electricity types and how much does it cost. Well, looking at this, if you look on the left, you can see the wind, the drop in the cost of wind since 2009. We're looking at a 71% decrease in the cost of wind. For solar, you're seeing it go 90% drop basically since 2009. This data is from 2020, but the trend, more or less continues if we were to look at 2021, and then we're eager to see what happens in 2022. But really what we have seen over the last couple of years, over the last decade or so, is quite significant drops in the cost of. Just to give you a sense of where that fits with other electricity types and for wind versus other kinds of technology. As you can see here on the left, you've got the bar of what the cost of onshore wind is, unsubsidized on the left, that is kind of a navy blue. You've got solar, that is kind of the golden colors. So you see that there is a range, $54 to $26 for wind, $38 to $29 for solar photovoltaic. And where that falls, if you look at coal, if you look at nuclear, if you look at combined cycle gas, it is really, they are all within the same range here. And the lower ends of the range for wind and solar are more affordable than the marginal cost of existing nuclear, gas, and coal. So it really is cost competitive. This comes into play in Alberta in a really big way for a number of reasons. And among those reasons that, among the first of these reasons that we talk about with wind and solar is really because we have in Alberta some of the best wind and solar resources in Canada, if not the whole world. So if we take a look at these, maps, there's a lot of information on these maps. On the left is a map of the wind resource in Alberta. On the right is a map of the solar resource in Alberta. And what's important is where you see orange on the map, where you see yellow on the map is where you have the strongest possible wind and solar resources in North America. So there would be different provinces and different states, obviously, that have resource areas that are orange and red and yellow as well. But just to get a sense of how much orange, how much red, how much yellow there is, and where it is, you can see you're really looking northeast of Calgary, around Lethbridge, around Medicine Hat for wind, and certainly with solar, you are seeing, you're seeing a lot again around Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, southern part of the province south of Calgary. So this is really where we see significant amounts of renewable energy, both wind and solar, that has both been developing since the 90s in the case of wind, and will continue to really accelerate in the future. How much do we have here? Well, wind right now we have 42 wind energy projects, utility scale projects. That accounts for about 2,200 megawatts of installed capacity. To get a sense of how much that is, in the province of Alberta, we have about 16,000 megawatts of total electricity. 2,200 megawatts are coming from wind energy. As far as solar goes, solar, we have about 15 utility scale solar PV projects totaling just short of 800 total megawatts. A lot of recent announcements have been made for more solar coming online, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we have more than 7 megawatts of small scale solar PV. You'll notice I don't have small scale wind here, but I do have small scale solar. And part of that reason is, wind typically gets built at a large scale, right? We're talking some of these more recent wind projects, you are talking turbine sizes that are 5 megawatts and larger is what's being deployed, because the bigger, the better with wind. The higher the towers, the more consistent wind resource you can get, the longer the blade, the more wind that you can capture. So a lot of the price declines that we've seen is as a result of these things getting bigger. Whereas solar, it's not about solar panels are not getting bigger, and that's not what's making them more efficient. But basically what's happening is the manufacturing of a solar panel is getting more and more efficient because the scale is getting to be so large. So as there is more and more solar being deployed across the world, the companies that create the solar panels are just able to do so at a bigger scale, which drives the prices down. What that means is you can have a big solar project. You have a 400 megawatt solar project, which was just deployed with the Travers project in Travers, Alberta. But you can also put, a couple of kilowatts up on the roof of your garage to power your house. You can't get the same kind of economies of scale out of wind turbine. You can't put a small turbine on your house and expect it to be really efficient, or as efficient as a large 150 meter tall 5 megawatt turbine. But with solar, you really, you can build a 400 megawatt solar farm with the same panels that you're putting on your roof, more or less. It's just how many of these do you want to put together? How much of a construction opportunity are you looking for? So again, the southern part of the province, the southeastern part of the province, is really where we're seeing a lot of boom in our technologies here in Alberta. And so that is one reason that we are seeing such opportunity for this sector and for people who want to work in this sector in Alberta. But there is a bigger picture here. We call it, the current UCP government. They campaigned with an idea that they would take what they called a market-based approach to renewables. So they wanted to see, renewables in the province, but they didn't want renewables to move forward with subsidization. They didn't want renewable energy to move forward with government support. They wanted to ensure that renewables could be added to the grid competitively and at the lowest cost possible. So, looking back on some of those cost comparisons between different kinds of technology, we see that renewable energy is very competitive when it comes to cost. We've also seen that we do have this really strong resource in Alberta that has, really allowed us to really expand what we have for wind and solar over the past several years. But what also is helping with this is aspects of what this government has called the market-based approach. So there's three parts of the market-based approach to renewables in Alberta from our perspective. First is the energy-only market. So in Alberta, we have a deregulated energy-only market in which any companies that want to build any kind of electricity are able to build and connect their facilities to the grid, should they want to do that. So if you decided that you had a market to sell electricity to, or you knew someone that was going to buy your electricity, you can connect without having to wait for a government procurement. There's also the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Regime, or the TIER regime, which is a carbon tax for large industrial emitters. So if you have a facility, an industrial facility that has emissions or releases greenhouse gases into the air, you either have to reduce your emissions, pay into the TIER fund or pay into the TIER carbon price, or you can buy offsets in order to reduce or offset the emissions that you have. Under this regime, wind and solar facilities can generate offsets, and they can generate other credits for sale to companies that want to reduce their carbon price obligations. So, we've seen examples where companies like TC Energy or Synovus or Labatt's have said, oh, we don't want to pay for our carbon price. We would rather buy offsets from wind and solar facilities and then give them to the government instead of paying the carbon price, because we can probably buy this more affordably from wind and solar. The third part of this is the transmission regulation, which is a rule about how power plants get connected to the grid. And the way the transmission regulation works is, remember I was saying with energy only market, any of us could invest in a wind farm if we wanted to and connect it to the grid. Transmission regulation is what guarantees that you can connect to the grid no matter where you're built in the province. So if you want to have a wind farm by Medicine Hat or a solar farm in Tabor, transmission regulation guarantees that you can actually get connected to sell energy to the energy only market and thereby sell offsets to large industrial emitters. So we call that the market-based approach to renewables. It allows generators to take their own risk, figure out who they're going to sell to, and how they are going to make that work for them. And that, it's really interesting here in Alberta, that has led to the development of a market force to drive decarbonization on the grid. So what we have here is some data from the Business Renewable Center. Business Renewable Center is a not-for-profit that educates potential buyers of clean electricity so they know what kind of benefits they can get from buying, from buying wind or solar and carbon credits at a long-term contract in order to reduce their costs of electricity, in order to reduce their carbon tax costs, and also to provide steady revenues to the developers of these projects. So as you can see, 2021, we've seen quite a lot of wind and solar contracts signed. 715 megawatts of solar contracts were signed. 547 contracts for wind were signed for projects around the province. This is companies like Synovus. This is companies like TC Energy. This is companies like TELUS. This is companies like the Bimbo Bakeries chain. These are all the kinds of companies, and Amazon is another big one there. Amazon and Amazon Web Services buying large amounts of solar energy directly from solar farms, in Alberta and wind farms in Alberta. 2022, 2022, we have seen additional ones since this document was created. Right now, it says that there's 191 megawatts to date as of this. I believe we are up in the range of 500 megawatts of contracts signed for these projects in Alberta in 2022, bringing Business Renewable Center and their work to demonstrate more than 2 gigawatts of contracts signed for these agreements between buyers and the sellers of renewable energy. Again, just to emphasize how much this is, we have a 16,000 megawatt grid, and over the last 3 years, we've seen 2,000 megawatts of new contracts signed with wind and solar. So this is, again, because of the quality of our resource, because market-based approach to renewables makes this possible, and wind and solar is really highly competitive compared to other generation types that are currently on the grid. So I guess the question that probably some of you are asking as you are looking at this through the lens of what this means for employment and what this means for jobs and things, I want to give an idea of what this means for investment and what this means for communities. So if you're building a 100 megawatt wind farm, you are looking at $170 million for a 100 megawatt wind farm, with more than 300 job years of construction there for that. So you figure it takes about a year or so to build a wind farm. So for every 100 megawatts, you're looking at about 300 people working on that plant. For a 100 megawatt solar PV facility, you're looking at about $125 million in investment and approximately 200 construction jobs. There's also benefits when it comes to 100 megawatt renewable, when you're thinking about property taxes to help communities pay for the services they need to provide, and as well as landowner lease agreements. So you're looking at about $1 million in annual property taxes for host communities. You're looking at approximately $500,000 in royalty payments to landowners. And to get a sense of where these projects are and what the amount of these projects, we have over at this point 16 solar farms with over 1.8 billion in proposed investments in the province, with 6 of those under construction at the time of grabbing these numbers. 10 wind farms totaling 2.5 billion, including 2 projects that are under construction for a value of 500 million. So as you can see, these are big, sophisticated investments that are going into rural communities in the southern part of the province, really helping communities with property taxes, providing options and revenues for landowners as well. And so really, really what we see here is something that I think is going to be really beneficial throughout major parts of Alberta over the years. And then one last thing that I did want to talk about as well is kind of land use and regulatory approach for this. I often, speaking before about, who our membership is and I, talking about the development process, it's not just construction and operation, but there is a lot of work that goes into pre-construction work, into the environmental permitting work, that is, I think, transferable across a lot of the energy development types in the province. So overall, there are 3 different government bodies that oversee the work that our members do. There is the Alberta Utilities Commission, which is the regulator for the electricity sector that has oversight on permitting. Alberta Environment and Parks, they develop the policy and assess the environmental impacts that feeds in to the work that the Alberta Utilities Commission does. And then there's the Alberta Electric System Operator that deals with the interconnection process and manages the sale of electricity for companies. So as far as the AUC goes, there is Rule 7, which is the application for facilities, and that is where companies make their application to determine whether or not their project is in the public interest. There is a noise control rule that limits the amount of noise that can be created by a plant, and it kind of sets out what the footprint of the plant could be in order to avoid loud noises over 40 decibels at receptors or homes. I guess you could call a receptor less technically. And then there is standardized post-approval monitoring requirements that ensure that the decision that is made by the AUC and the impacts of any projects are mitigated and managed over the life of a project. Now, when you're talking about these impacts, it's Alberta Environment and Parks that supports the work of the AUC. They're the ones that make sure that the wildlife directives and the wildlife requirements and the siting requirements are fulfilled, and they evaluate that before a project gets permitted. As well, they ensure that projects plan properly for the reclamation requirements at the end of life. They make sure that there's a plan. And then B, they make sure that at the end of a project life, that work has actually been done. These things that AEP, Alberta Environment and Parks, or AEP does, whether it's on the Wildlife Directive or on reclamation, they pass that along to the Alberta Utilities Commission for the permitting process, and both of those organizations work together. Alberta Electric System Operator deals with applications from the perspective of actually connecting to the grid. Alberta Electric System Operator ensures that any project fulfills the requirements to be connected to the grid. They ensure that there is infrastructure that actually gets built out to connect the project to the grid. And then as the project is operating, it ensures that revenues are being delivered to the power plant in exchange for electricity being sent to the grid. So these are the 3 regulatory organizations. And as part of the development process, not only are developers trying to get a project planned from a technical or generation perspective, but there's all these other considerations around wildlife, considerations around conservation and reclamation, considerations around noise that also provide provide other opportunities for occupations as well. Just one last thing, I like to emphasize this on any call that I'm doing around the development, is just to emphasize for folks as well that renewable energy doesn't fall under the Surface Rights Act. And what that means is that land access for a wind and solar farm is voluntary. Landowners get to decide whether or not they host a wind turbine or solar panels. And so landowners are not compelled to provide access for renewable energy projects. So again, you have people that work with landowners to ensure that landowners are getting what they need to be considered as partners with this project, and that they are getting the best use of their land from this. So that is really my overview. Hopefully I've covered enough in a short amount of time here about what renewable energy development and operations look like in Alberta. And I'd be pleased to take any questions. Thanks for having me.
Excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you.
That was super informative and just really, really interesting. A lot of those facts I didn't even know. So yeah, really cool.